your patients are not going to buy into you as a dentist until they're bought into you as a person.
I'm delighted to be joined by Raj Rattan. Raj, your background is in general dental practice. You have owned and operated a small group of dental practices. You've combined this with part-time roles in dental education and dental legal work. You've successfully managed a foundation training scheme for many years before being appointed Strategic Associate Dean for Foundation Training at the London Deanery. You have provided consultancy services to several public and private organisations, including the NHS, Denplan, dental corporates, and the Department of Health, where you have served as a GDS policy advisor. You are the author and co-author of a number of textbooks and articles on different aspects of general dental practice, and have lectured extensively throughout the UK, internationally, for many years. You were a part-time dental legal consultant at Dental Protection for over 20 years before taking up your current role as dental director in 2016. It is a pleasure to have you on today, Raj. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much. You've obviously been speaking to my mother, Paul.
I certainly have. Raj, the hot topic of dentistry is in the public eye more than ever before right now. I think the obvious point in question that surfaces immediately is the interruption of routine dental care as a result of the pandemic. We're seeing the significant backlog of patients, a suggestion of 35 million missed appointments lost to COVID. How is this going to be possible for dentists to catch up?
We have to look at it from a patient point of view, from a clinical dimension, first of all. If I look across the sort of typical practice patient base, and there will be patients that will fall into three categories, I guess. And there will be those who are in need of immediate or urgent treatment and care. There will be a group of patients whose treatment has been interrupted or suspended because of the pandemic. And some of those patients will be in a stable state, others may not be. And then the third category will be the patients whose routine examination appointments may have been postponed. But if as a dentist you are confident that those patients are not going to suffer because of the delay, it doesn't matter too much if their examination appointments are postponed. So I think those are the three categories, and that's probably the way to prioritize the care. Mm-hmm. I would just add one other thing, because it reflects a conversation I had with a dentist a few weeks ago. And he called me because he was facing a dilemma, because he'd been asked to work from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. 4 days a week in an attempt to recover the time lost. And his concern was that he was starting to feel very tired, very fatigued, and approaching what he described as burnout. And I think we have to be cautious that the recovery cannot simply be to do longer hours, because there is a cost associated with that. And we know that, fatigue and burnout increases the incidence of errors, and patient care can be compromised as a result. So I would just add that in as a word of caution. And it's going to probably take us 2 years, maybe 2.5 years, to slowly recover from those missed appointments, the figure that you quoted. I did a very crude calculation on how much extra time was needed over a working month. Now, there are so many assumptions you have to make when you do a calculation like that, but the results of my own kind of method of calculation was that you actually need a 5-week month for the next 2 years to actually recover from those interruptions. And anything that can help to increase capacity will contribute towards that, including any reduction in fallow time.
Raj, there's no doubt that NHS dentistry is facing a challenging period. In contrast, the acceleration of the private sector has shone through. What's your own thoughts on this trend?
Within the NHS, dentists are allowed to offer patients treatments that are an alternative to NHS treatment. And I think dentists are increasingly doing this. And I think one of the reasons they're doing this is because there is a general concern amongst practitioners that targets and time pressures are very difficult to manage in everyday practice. Given the role that I have in dental protection, we are very aware that clinicians who work to targets and then work under time pressure, the likelihood of error is likely to increase. By the time you've gone through a consent process, by the time you've made adequate contemporaneous records, it does not leave much time for the actual treatment, if it's a fairly minor intervention. And I think dentists are generally finding it a difficult environment in which to work. So I think those are a couple of the factors. But I think also there are some patient factors as well. Now, I'm not an economist, but I understand that in Q1 of this year, the savings ratio was just over 18%, and it's the second highest on record. Last year, we also had, I think, the largest quarterly fall on consumer spending. This has meant that patients have got funds, they've got savings. The other reason I think it's happening, it's a very different reason, is that most people have now experienced the virtual working environment. And they have spent many hours each day looking at themselves, speaking, as I am doing now. People notice what they believe to be flaws in their appearance. This has increased the awareness of, for example, cosmetic dentistry, and it's a phenomenon that's been recognized in the medical field. Just to add to that, I think I don't have the data here, but pretty much every report has been signaling quite an exponential growth in cosmetic dentistry.
Yeah.
And it's also partly propelled by the fact that NHS contract values are fixed in the main, and if a practice wants to grow, then the only sector to explore is the non-NHS sector.
There seems to be an underlying problem with recruitment in NHS dentistry just now. But granted, not all practices have those difficulties. However, do you see a solution to fix this problem across associates and nursing staff? What can be done to get more people to join the profession?
I think we are where we are for a number of reasons. It's not there isn't a single solution in my view. Undoubtedly, there's been some impact from Brexit. I think we expected that, we anticipated that. I think the pandemic has also probably meant that some clinicians who have families abroad have decided actually if there was going to be a suspension of care, if they were going to isolate and be in lockdown, they'd rather be with their families. I personally know of a couple of dentists that have done that and have gone back to Spain and are considering staying in Spain and not returning for that very reason. There's been a suspension of the overseas registration examination, I believe, for a couple of years. So that has actually in some ways diminished the supply, if I can use that word, coming through. And I think lastly, and again, I know several dentists who've decided to cut down and perhaps work part-time. They've taken the pandemic, perhaps reconfigured their lives a little bit. Their attention's been drawn to more personal matters, more family matters rather than business matters. And a number of them have said to me, actually, there's more to life than dentistry. So I think it's a combination of those things, really. And the cumulative effect of all those elements will be significant.
What do you think the smaller group or single site practice can do to entice those members of staff to join?
If you look at the sort of psychological research that's been done around what is it that people most value in the workplace, what makes work satisfying, if you like, it's a number of things. It's autonomy. It's important that the staff and the team recognizes the leadership and has the same belief and values that the leadership demonstrates. I think if there's a disconnect there, disconnect between what they see and what the rhetoric is, then that creates some angst. People have to feel valued. People have to feel that there are opportunities for them to grow within the practice, to upskill or cross-skill, and that there will be some support to do that. There has to be what the employee perceives as equity, in terms that there has to be a connection between effort and reward. And that's kind of where pay, I think, comes in. And then there is this sense, I think, in all of us in the workplace, that we all want to feel that we are part of a bigger picture and that we're engaged in an activity or an enterprise that is contributing to the greater good. And I think that's particularly true in healthcare. Part of this is also around being valued by the patient. And certainly from my experience, dental nurses I worked with who were with me for many, many years, the patients were as attached to my nurse as they were to me. So I think, there's a complexity here. There are psychological factors, there's emotional factors, and all of these have to be in place. I think we have to tackle the situation more with the heart than the head, if I can express it like that.
Raj, does the migration of NHS patients to the private sector create a new demand for lower priced private dentistry?
I think that is absolutely the case, Paul. It's something that I always felt in our practice. If you are talking about lowering the price without that affecting the standards, it drives that value equation in the right direction from a patient perspective. And ultimately, the price is just a number. It's a numerical evaluation of how much a patient values the service. But I'd also say it's not just about the clinical aspects of dentistry, the clinical products of dentistry, or the service. I think it's also often about the individual dentist. In my days of running a foundation sort of training scheme, I often used to say to the new graduates, I said, if you were to say to me, you're only allowed to say one sentence about your experience in general practice, what would that sentence be? And I would say that sentence is that your patients are not going to buy into you as a dentist until they're bought into you as a person. Yes, about the value equation, but also about the person that's delivering the care. And there is another view which we have to recognize, that there is also this view that if something, the price also in some way affects somebody's perception of quality. So we have to balance up the value equation with how the patient is going to perceive the quality of care. The word private dentistry, in the minds of some patients, automatically the word private rings alarm bells.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I used to do when I would talk to patients about non-NHS options that were, if you like, at the value end of the pricing continuum, was I would use the phrase, this treatment, we will carry this out for you outside NHS arrangements.
Okay.
Because to me, it was a softer phrase. It was accurate, it was true, but it separated the value-based proposition from the private proposition.
We're expecting to see an increase in platform and private equity investment in the sector in the next 12 months and beyond. What's your own views on this, and what benefit does it bring to the market?
Any new entrant, it creates competition in the market. And I think competition is good.
Yeah.
Competition will drive up service standards, quality of care, and I think it's a healthy place to be. From a financial point of view, my understanding is that it's an attractive sector because it's largely perceived as being sort of recession-proof. And over the years, we've been through some tough times, global financial crisis, pandemic, and so forth. And I think the sector has demonstrated resilience.
Yeah.
So I think downside risk is manageable for investors. So I think that's probably also going to drive the market. And generally, I think dentists who are close to retirement may be thinking, actually, if I was going to retire in 5 years, I may think about doing this a little bit earlier and consider sort of selling their practice. So, you'll be more aware of market trends in that respect. But, if we find in 2022 or 2023, there are more practices available on the market, then that's an incentive, I guess, for new entrants and for some consolidation in the market, in the sector.
Absolutely. You know, the dynamics that we see just now is demand significantly outweighs supply, but that is not hindering the appetite of buyers who are coming into the marketplace. You know, they're not looking at it as a sector that has limited supply. Raj, another hot topic just now, and it's something that's been ongoing for a while. I'm keen to get your thoughts on the current NHS landscape, mainly the impending reformed NHS contract, and potentially what the future holds for NHS dentistry.
There is absolutely a need for change.
Yeah.
I think the challenge is that how do you create a contract currency which drives the right behaviors which deliver the most beneficial clinical outcomes?
Yeah.
And aligning those two is actually very difficult. Mm-hmm. The other challenge, I think, for the NHS more broadly, and again, it's a personal view, is, you know, if we look at NHS dentistry, there are three stakeholders. You know, we have the clinicians and the clinical teams, we have the government, and we have the patients. Mm-hmm. The patients, as taxpayers, seek the best possible care for the least financial outlay. That's not an unreasonable perspective for a patient. The dentists and the members of the clinical team, they want to deliver the best possible care, but they want to receive fair remuneration for their efforts. The government, charged with the responsibility of spending taxpayers' money wisely, actually want the best and the most for the least. If you were a Treasury official, that's what your job description would be, I guess. And it's not an unreasonable job description because you are charged with the responsibility of managing taxpayers' money. So the perspectives of these three stakeholders, you know, each one on its own, are absolutely valid, and we can understand each perspective. But ladies and gentlemen, they are also mutually exclusive. Yeah, we simply cannot deliver all three. It just isn't possible. Mm-hmm. So I think whatever system comes in, it will have imperfections because there are financial constraints in the system. So I would hope that we develop a system where the metrics are changed and aligned, and where there is flexibility in mixing NHS and private care. And third, but equally importantly, a focus on prevention delivered in a way that involves the entire dental team.
You recognise over the years how the system has changed. What would you say for a practicing dentist, the risk for those individuals or independent principal to try and mitigate those risks from a practicing perspective?
Now more than ever, there has to be a risk management strategy. I think practices should maintain a risk register. I believe, and I'm sure many corporates do, but I think individual practice owners should do exactly the same. The risks probably haven't altered a great deal. Okay. I think what has altered, because the risks, I think, were always there. I think what has altered is our knowledge and understanding of them, but also our perception of them. Because, there's a form of psychological bias, it's called availability bias. If you have information that comes from multiple sources, and all that information is telling you is that dentistry is becoming a more risky profession, that's the first piece of information you will recall when you talk about risk. It's called availability bias, because that information is readily available to the brain because of its recency. Subconsciously, we think that is what reality is, and often it's not the case. Okay. So one of the things that we're trying to do at Dental Protection is also to introduce some sort of balance, and the focus of a couple of recent presentations we've done to our international members has been around that, to say we mustn't be complacent, absolutely not, but we do need to introduce some risk intelligence into our thinking, because things actually are not quite as bad as the perception might suggest.
Raj, in my neighbouring city, we've just had COP26 in Glasgow. We're all increasingly aware of the uncomfortable truth that our way of life is unsustainable. It's tempting to think that our actions are insignificant. However, do you see dentistry playing an important role in averting irreversible climate change and protecting the environment?
Apparently, staff and patient travel accounts for approximately 60% or thereabouts of the carbon footprint. If commissioners are aware of that, it may impact commissioning decisions in the future, because if you are setting up a new site, looking more carefully at transport links than perhaps is being done at the moment or has been done in the past, that would be one way so that public transport could be used. I think the dental industry can look at packaging, for example, maybe even looking at the life cycles of the equipment that we purchase, using the virtual medium more perhaps as an alternative for some face-to-face conferences and events. And it occurs to me, actually, this is a good example, because when you kindly invited me to participate originally, I planned for an hour and a half journey into London and then a return journey, and then realized actually this was a virtual. So not only have you saved me, 3 hours of my working day, but it's an example of what I've just been saying. So I think those sort of areas are probably how we as a profession can contribute to what is clearly a very topical and important issue.
Raj, we've covered a number of topics today, all of which have had incredible insight from you, and I can only thank you enough for that. It's been a pleasure speaking with you today, and thanks for taking the time to join the conversation.
It's a pleasure to take part, Paul, and my thanks to you and your colleagues for inviting me, and also for the IT support in the background. Thank you.
Thank you.